Okay, so this week at Roger Christi, we are discussing one of the misconceptions that we think is around Christianity. And so I was given the title of, Does Christianity Understand Social Justice? Or do Christians understand social justice? Or social justice? What is it? And for this time, I want to have a really open discussion around this. So if we can be engaged and participatory, that would be great, because the efficacy of this session is going to rely on all of you participating. And I'm not here, I don't want to tell anyone anything in this time. I want to engage in thinking. So apparently Socrates spent a large chunk of his work just talking about the fact that we don't know what justice is. So I'm going a slightly different route than social justice. If you have any questions along the way, remember that I kind of want to start at the root, at the base. But I've decided to do this format because I think it'll be more fruitful if we're engaged. And also, there's an essay somewhere by C.S. Lewis that he's lamenting the growth of student organizations. And so when he returned from World War I, I think groups at Oxford had grown by like tenfold, when it used to average 8 people. And what's great about that, and what's great about a small group, is we can actually engage with each other, and we can engage with the ideas as we're going through, rather than just hearing one person's thoughts. So I'm not coming today as an expert. I'm coming as a learner, and we're all learning about social justice, about justice. As I've said, it's going to be discussion-based. It's going to be the discussions are going to be around what's on these sheets in front of you. And I want to start off with a bit of a primer. So it's not quite on justice, but we're going to talk about the first one, discuss in the dark. And a couple things, because of the way this happens, I don't know how long it's going to take. It could take 10 hours, you don't have to stay, but the conversation's like that, or it could take 30 minutes if no one has anything to say. That being said, we are limited to time, so if I feel that we need to jump on to the next one, I might have to cut off conversation at some point in time. But let's jump in with Discuss in the Dark. And Bethany, I was wondering if you could read it for us.
Yeah. Suppose that a great commotion arises in the street about something. Let us say a lamppost, which many influential persons desire to pull down. A grey-clad monk, who is the spirit of the Middle Ages, is approached upon the matter and begins to say, in the arid manner of the schoolman, "Let us first of all consider, my brethren, the value of life, if life be in itself good." At this point, he is somewhat excusably knocked down. All the people make a rush for the lamppost. The lamppost is down in 10 minutes, and they go about congratulating each other upon their unmedieval practicality. But as things go on, they do not work out so easily. Some people have pulled the lamppost down because they wanted the electric light, some because they wanted old iron, some because they wanted darkness, because their deeds were evil. Some thought it not enough of a lamppost, some too much, some acted because they wanted to smash municipal machinery, some because they wanted to smash something. And there is war in the night, no man knowing whom he strikes. So gradually and inevitably, today, tomorrow, or the next day, there comes back the conviction that the monk was right after all, and that all depends on what is the philosophy of light. Only what we might have discussed under the gas lamp, we must now discuss in the dark.
Thank you. Okay, so here's the first question I'm going to pose to you today. Feel free, anyone can chime in. If no one does, I might try to call on some people who I know are going to participate. So first question, why do you think I chose that piece? What might it have to do with our discussion today?
I think it shows, because when we talk about social justice, we always question, why do people do evil things? And what stood out to me from this quote is that people took out the light because they actually wanted darkness, because they wanted to do their evil deeds. So I guess there's like two sides to social justice, like people who want to do evil things and people who want to counteract that.
And do you think that people who want to do evil things think that way? Are they saying, oh, I want to do evil things?
Probably not.
And so in light of this, what might be a helpful point in this around that idea? And I'm going to ask some weird questions today, but it's to illustrate a point. And so if you don't know, you don't have to answer. So anyone else have ideas around the value of this conversation? I think that's right, by the way. I think she's got a really good, Vanetta has a very good point.
Can you repeat your point? Sorry.
Repeat the question.
We'll take out the light so we can effectively, I might rephrase it as behave how we want to. I have maybe guide up here. If we're looking back, so the description is of medieval practicality. What is medieval? We can speak about it chronologically or ideologically.
It's a whole different time period.
Yeah, so it is a different time period, and it preceded the time period they're in. And I think there's a bit in there about what people recently have taken to calling chronological snobbery. And so we look back at previous peoples and previous ideas as being a bit silly, and ours are better, and we don't really need to engage with theirs, because the ones we have today are just naturally superior. And so I think that's a good place to start with. See if I had any other questions about that. So I do, actually. What in modern sense, in contemporary sense, what is something we really value right now in terms of politics, in terms of ethics, science, morality? Everyone talks about some aspect of forward motion, if I might put it like that.
Choice.
There's choice to act in a way that progresses us. So if a lot of campaigns nowadays are built on the idea of progress, and so we have to choose for progress, and if we can choose either to go back or forward. And so this here is talking about progress, but it's talking about a progress that's really unrooted. And so throw out what we have and let's move forward. But so my question is, can we progress in the dark? And you can answer that, or I can make it rhetorical.
Well, you could progress in the dark. It would just potentially be dark progression.
But how would you know if it's progression or regression?
I think progression and regression go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
They move like that. Yeah, not every progress forward is.
And so how are you meaning that? Can we get examples? Can we get an idea of how that works?
Yeah, there's quite a bit to talk about. The whole group called the social justice warriors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, their ideas for the most part are good, but their rhetoric and their actions and this thing is very it's detrimental, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And so how, if we wanted to assess those statements, they're good and they're detrimental, how do we know what's good and how do we know what's detrimental?
You have to know the difference between positive change and negative change.
Mm-hmm.
I think his point was definitely going off of, sometimes we move forward, but moving forward sometimes brings on negative change, which then kind of is like regression, not really progression. So yeah, without light though, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, in the interest of moving forward, yes, I think those are great points. And it is the light that we need to consider. Where does the light come from? How does it allow us within our system of thinking and illuminate what we're talking about? And how does it illuminate our system of thinking? I think those are two really important questions that everyone needs to ask themselves when they're thinking about anything, actually, is what validates this thought within my system and what validates my system. So, moving forward, I want to see if we can analyze the question before we really talk about the history behind it, which is my point. So does Christianity understands social justice. I had a really difficult time starting out with this, and as I carried these books and some others around in my backpack for about a month. It got kind of heavy. I haven't read all of them, but I have touched large portions of each one of them, and I still kind of have this feeling, where do I go? What am I doing? Where do I start? So my question to you, I'll explain the reason about this question first. We need to understand what the question's asking before we can really start to answer it. What do you think I struggled with in this question? What might you struggle with in this question? Might be a better way of starting that out.
What's the question again?
Does Christianity, sorry, I'm trying to time this, understand social justice?
What exactly is social justice?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And so if you were to go on that route, what might you say are some issues around understanding social justice?
Really, like the issue on, Hillary supporting, being able to abort at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big issue. There's many.
I think that's right. Anyone else have ideas on problems with the question itself, or they don't have to be problems, they could be good things, just
What differentiates justice from social justice?
yes. And so do you have any further thoughts on that?
No.
Okay. You don't have to. I mean, that is what this time's about. It's about, if we can engage, let's engage. But if we can't, let's just recognize that there are questions that we need to think about.
I think it comes down to the interpretation of different Christians, because they don't all interpret the same scripture the same way.
Yes.
So people have their own ideas of what justice is.
Right. Actually, if we want to combine both of those things, that's what I hit on. So you've talked about Christians and people, and we talked about social justice. What I saw is I had to make two leaps to talking about this. Not leaps of faith in a sense where I just didn't understand, but leaps into a topic that was left undefended at the base. And so if we want to rephrase Christians, and I think you did that really well. Sorry, what's your name? Abbas. I thought you did that really well. People, anyone. Does anyone understand social justice? But before we got there, we said, social justice, that's moving too far. That's leaping into it. Why do we need the social aspect? So I kind of thought, let's rephrase it. Does anyone understand justice? Now, I put that question to you. Do we understand justice? Can anyone tell me what justice is?
What does it mean to understand something?
Well, that's a fair
What
point.
does
That's
it
a
mean
fair
to
point.
be
Yeah.
And I will say there are leaps like I said, there are leaps we kind of have to make to be able to have these discussions. So yes, what does it mean to understand something? Very postmodern question. But if we want to go anywhere, we kind of have to accept some type of understanding is going to arise.
I don't think there's a definite definition of what justice is. Again, it comes down to different people's interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
For me, justice is fairness.
Okay.
Fair.
And
If it always relies on everybody's interpretation, then that's kind of
well, the different societies have a particular consensus around it.
does that consensus need to be validated?
Well, I mean, we have for our laws that we've basically put on the books.
Right. So are you justice is being right in the law?
Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes it is for me. Sometimes it's not.
Do you want to add any more to that on how you might
I mean,
decide when it isn't?
I mean, I'm pro gay marriage, and a lot of states, supposedly are not for it.
So it seems that you might be tapping into something deeper than the law.
Yeah. So there are places where I disagree with the law. There are places where I agree.
Mm-hmm. And how do you make that decision?
I think it comes down to our own conscience,
And
individual
when someone else's conscience varies, how do you decide who's correct?
Well, I look at it this way. Which is likely to cause harm, more harm or less harm? You know, it comes down to harm, basically. Harm to the individual.
And so if someone else has a conscience where harm is fine,
Harm is fine.
yeah, how do you deal with that?
That person needs to go and reassess his state of mind.
But on what basis? If it's an individual choice, if it's individual conscience, how are you telling them they need to reassess?
I don't know.
No, that's fine.
Because
That's-
you can do this all night.
You can.
You can do this forever.
and that's my point, actually, is you can do it forever.
I've only got like 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we might need to move off this topic again, but I want someone else a chance. What is justice? And by the way, let me talk about what I mean is justice. I'm not talking about a definition of justice, or an application of justice, or a cause of justice, but the essence of justice.
I think we all have this sort of innate desire for things to turn out kind of right in the end, for the people who did good to receive good, and people who did bad to receive bad. You see that in, well, at least the happy endings, sort of even children's TV shows especially, like that, like when we're younger we can't deal with that sort of dissonance, so we need to see, like it's very big with kids, like, that's not fair, like they'll say a lot, and it's all about, yeah, it's very, especially, it's very, very concrete for kids, and that actually just sticks with us because we want that when it comes down to it, you know.
So, a couple questions could arise there. Are you saying justice is fair, or the perception of justice is that it's fairness?
I think that's a perception. It's not necessarily the definition, but it's.
And one second, I have a couple of questions, and then you're next. So there is a debate on this, but is fairness an application of justice, or is fairness justice?
I'm not sure about that one. I was just thinking, I was like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'm not, and people have been debating that exact thing for centuries. Rista.
My response to the question of what is justice is that justice is the idea that there is a right or a wrong way to do something. That's the reason why we make legislation in the first place, because I think that some people do something the wrong way or in a harmful way, and it causes damage to others. The reason why I specifically say I think it's the right, or that the idea that there's a right or wrong way to do something, instead of just that it is not doing something that hurts other people, is that people get a sense of even having, like within themselves, having done something unjust, sometimes when it doesn't necessarily hurt someone else.
And so I think a couple things are happening in that statement, which is a very, very good one. But there's this murky idea you were alluding to of an idea. And so that idea in your statement seems to me that it would be the essence of justice. Would you agree with that, or were you saying, okay. And so we want to establish what that essence is. That's the goal of a lot of people trying to do justice. It's what allows me to say this is right and say this is wrong. And there are loads and loads of ways going about it. If we want to talk about fairness, though, which I think tends to be the most prevalent idea in our society right now, what might be an issue around fairness, or to each their own? Kind of, you get what you deserve because it's fair. Or there are other definitions of fairness. Would you want to change that?
I think that was what I was getting at.
Okay. So one interesting thing that was pointed out, I won't take credit for this idea, pointed out to me about what might be wrong with the to each their own idea is, well, let's do a practice. If you were to consider right now your most valued object or idea or possession, whatever it is, were you do that object? examples, if that is
What was the
helpful.
question?
Where you
So-
did you mean like
so
were you
if-
DUEE, were you
DUE,
deserving of?
yeah, where you,
Yeah, okay.
so if you consider your most prized possession, your greatest relationship, the best idea you can think of, is that something you deserve to have? Jared, do you have any thoughts?
You were really scrambled.
That's all right. This is unscrambling session, hopefully, or rescrambling. It could go either way.
I think that depends on what you mean by deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you earn it, or you intrinsically good, or you did something, or yeah, like what do you mean by
Deserve. And that's another point, that every single one of these has constructed ideas around them. And so if we want to relate our constructed idea, we have to tell someone else why it's better than their constructed idea of deserve. And so Aristotle, who we'll get to next, had an idea of deserve, and he based a lot of justice around that. But I don't think it's his is based on virtue. Today we talk mostly about working hard and winning, if we want to put it in a more colloquial term. But that doesn't seem to be what was meant in the past. And so one of the points in this session, and in this part of my session, that I want to really enunciate is that we use a lot of terms and we don't really know what they mean. We don't really understand what other people mean by them, and we don't really think about it. So you've got people, running down the streets, yelling whatever they're yelling, but when they're asked, what are you doing, can they give an answer? And if they can give an answer, can they give an answer on why their answer is supported? And yeah, you're right, we can do this forever. But the hope of many, many people is that there's a basis for these. Because if you can do it forever, that kind of means there isn't a basis for what you're talking about. And we do end up in this postmodern society of each can live their life as they see fit. But when you apply that, it gets really, really hard. Okay, so I think it might be time to, actually, sorry, one more thing, is I wanted to touch on the importance of etymology. Does anyone know the etymology of the word justice? Does anyone know etymology? It's okay, I wrote it down because I assumed people wouldn't. Just, the word just is borrowed from the French. I assume they pronounce it juste or something. And in French, it means, historically, a word that means righteous in the eyes of God. That French word is from a Latin word, justus, which means equitable in the eyes of the law, complete, which is from ius, which in Latin means a legal right. And so does anyone know what the suffix ice, means? It means participation, membership in just. So if justice, in an etymological sense, is the participation in being just, as laid out in Latin and French, either the participation in being right in front of the law, or the participation in being right in front of God. And actually there's a lot of overlap in that, as we'll come to see. But before I move on, can anyone tell me why etymology might be important? And if it helps, it's a point I've already made.
It would help us understand how previous people thought about justice.
Precisely. So, do we live in a vacuum? No. Exactly. Speaking of which, let's turn to Aristotle. Do we have any volunteers on reading Aristotle? I can do it if no one wants to.
One person reading it.
Yeah, this is the longest excerpt. Sorry about that, but it's a good one.
I can read it. I've said that he encourages the city to look after the welfare of the citizens, but I didn't tell you who he counts as a citizen. Aristotle devotes some attention to this question and concludes that a citizen is someone who is actively involved with political affairs. Not all citizens will necessarily be running the city at any given time, but they take turns carrying out official duties and must at least participate in the political process. Thus, in a tyranny, nobody in the city apart from the tyrant is truly a citizen, by Aristotle's definition. Only the tyrant has a say in the running of the city, and the tyrant's welfare is pursued to the exclusion of everybody else. So men must pass a high standard in order to qualify as citizens. They must be ready to help govern, and they can qualify because of their nobility, their wealth, or their virtue, depending on the constitution. For instance, an aristocracy puts a lot of emphasis on nobility and wealth. No matter what constitution we are talking about, Aristotle assumes that it will be men alone who can pass the standard and be citizens. Plato had argued in the Republic that women can perform all the same activities as men, even if not equally, and that there would therefore be women guardians and rulers in the ideal city. We saw Aristotle remarking in his Ethics that men and women cannot share in perfect friendship because women are inferior to men. Now, in the Politics, he goes further, saying that the rational power of women lacks control or authority. Women need men to tell them what to do, since they are by nature unable to regulate their own affairs properly, never mind the affairs of the city. Obviously, this is not Aristotle's finest hour, and we haven't even gotten to his notorious discussion of slavery. As you probably know, slavery was a pervasive phenomenon in the ancient world. It was very common for warfare to involve the enslavement of conquered peoples, and a wealthy Greek or Roman household would typically include slaves who did menial and even not so menial tasks. In Aristotle's account of slavery, we see the downside of his fidelity to common opinion and empirical research. He seems to think that since slavery is such a widespread phenomenon, it must be explained philosophically, and his explanation sounds uncomfortable, like a defense of the indefensible. Even this, though, is perhaps letting him off too lightly. After all, Aristotle is willing to reject received opinion when it suits him, and he is aware that rejecting the naturalness of slavery is an opinion, because he mentions a view held by others, according to which all slavery is by custom, not nature. But he has no truck with this, and instead adopts what he no doubt sees as one of his characteristically moderate middle positions. He argues that some people are what he calls natural slaves, and that it is not only permissible to enslave such people, but actually the right thing to do. A natural slave is, as he puts it, a living tool, and is in an even worse condition than a free woman when it comes conducting his own life. It is good for the slave to be owned, just as it is good for a woman to be dominated by her husband or father. Obviously, I'm not going to speak out in support of Aristotle's idea about slavery, but we should take account of his aims in this discussion. He is not trying to persuade his reader that slavery is legitimate. Despite the aforementioned abolitionist view, few ancient readers would have needed persuasion on this score. Rather, he is trying to articulate a set of rules or limits to be placed on slavery. It is wrong, on his view, to enslave those who are not natural slaves. So putting whole Greek cities into bondage after victory in war was definitely not acceptable, given that many in those cities would not be natural slaves. These are people whose souls might make them fit to be citizens participating in a political community, not mere tools of other men. Plato made a similar point in the Republic, exhorting the Greeks to stop enslaving one another, but also saying that those outside the fold of Greek society, so-called barbarians, were fit for enslavement. Aristotle agrees, remarking, for instance, that everyone who lives in Asia is a natural slave. He connects this to climate in a familiar way from the Hippocrates corpus. There, too, it is suggested that one's character is affected by one's environment. It just so happens, according to Aristotle, that the climate of Greece is perfectly temperate, so that the Greeks tend not to be naturally slavish. It follows that barbarians cannot really engage in proper political arrangements, since they do not have the souls one would need to engage successfully in such arrangements. And indeed, he says bluntly that among the barbarians, no one is a natural ruler. Their cities are communities of slaves. As with Plato, Aristotle's political ideas spring from deep convictions about justice, but he does not have in mind anything like our modern idea of human rights. He's happy to shut women and natural slaves out of political life, because they cannot contribute anything. The justice he has in mind has more to do with reciprocation. Those who make the city strong should have a say in the decision-making. Paul Adamson, Classical Philosophy.
Thank you. Wonderful reading. So, sorry that's a bit of a longer one, but let's jump into it. What is Aristotle trying to accomplish?
There is one part said like basically defend the indefensible.
Yeah, in relation to slavery, I think that's correct. But really in the whole realm, why does slavery even come up? I'll give you a hint. It is what we were just talking about in the last section.
Darkness.
Huh? Justice is
Oh.
so he's trying to understand what justice is. Now I didn't ask the question, what does Aristotle think justice is, because it's written right there. But let's talk about that. Aristotle's definition of justice. Can someone remind us of what it was? It's right there at the end.
The strong should have a say in what decisions are made.
Yes.
Reciprocation.
Reciprocation.
Those
Yes.
who make the city strong should have a say in the decision making.
Right. Right. And so, just background on Aristotle. I don't know if anyone knows much. Does anyone know a lot about Aristotle? Feel free to jump in. So, Aristotle has a bit of a murky relationship with theology. It's really difficult to discern what he's talking about in theology. But this is according to a good friend of mine I just talked to. He's doing his PhD in Aristotle at Oxford. So I'm taking him as correct on this. But Aristotle deals with teleological concepts, bringing him back to his reasons. So teleological purpose. What is their purpose? So he's saying that each person has a natural purpose. To fulfill it is just. And then they receive, based on what they're naturally able to fulfill, is what they should be receiving, and that's justice. So we've already talked about this idea a little bit, because Bethany brought it up. So we can kind of jump over issues around that. But the bigger question is, why does this not look like our idea of justice today? Not how, it says how, but why? What's changed? And what's the reason for accepting the change?
Better versions of what justice.
How did those come about?
John, obviously, women and slaves,
I do, yeah. But so, what is our grounds today for saying that slavery is wrong and women are equal? And before this goes anywhere on the internet, I do think that.
We'll just take that clip.
Yeah, the question is why, and how are we today justified in saying that?
because we're all children of God.
Okay,
Yes, but
My opinion.
first of all, this says truth and Christianity. Is this truth? Is this Christianity? Where is the Christianity in this at all? To be even discussing it and comparing it or trying to make it be understandable, and we're supposed to be finding some kind of relationship to all of that. But if we have Christianity, and if we have Christ, then the example is Christ, is Jesus. So therefore, that's where we should look to see what he did, what he taught, and how he handled it. That, to me, then, would be justice and correct, because really it's pretty high. And the reason why we want to discuss other ways of doing it, because we don't think we can do that. We don't think we can live our life the way he did. Meaning, what do you do to your brother? Who's your brother? Who is your brother? And
so, I mean, I agree with where we're going. The point in doing this is because today we have a lot of people who don't think that way. And so if we want to tell them this is the way to think, then I agree that we do, but we need to come about it. And, how are we going to defend this? Just saying it.
By proving it individually in our life. if we have proof of what we're doing and we stick to that, and we do not alter it,
What's the proof?
is what they see us doing. If we say, this is what we mean, this is what we mean, that's our truth.
But what if they just say this is wrong then?
It's okay if they say it's wrong.
Okay,
But-
yeah, I agree it is. But are there not other grounds for truth claims than through actions?
Well, maybe so, but I don't think that's what Christianity says.
Why not? Where does it
Because
not say?
it says that there is one mind,
Mhm.
one mind, not all these other minds. That's error. That's a belief of man believing that they can be little gods or be, that's all that kind of stuff. That's how I see it. I just see that if we're saying that this man Jesus was true, if we're saying Christianity is true, that there's a Christianity, that there's a God, there's Christ, and if we're saying that either he was not truthful, either he was dualistic thought, and he was confused, back and forth, in which even Christians say God must have, he must be evil, and he must be good.
So we're actually going to unpack that topic next week.
Are we?
I don't want to
Yeah.
put a stop to your train because it's a good train. It's
hard
just
for me because I guess
that's going to be next
my
week.
point of view is I'm kind of like metaphysics, but I include deity, not just metaphysics. I have a deity. There's one. See, that's how I see it.
Okay, I'll accept that. I don't understand how that can't correlate with what we're talking about. It's about the development of thought. That's what we're doing right now. So
He's building a case, and we're getting to like an ultimate argument that he's
Yeah.
going to put forth.
And actually, yes, I am doing that. But really, what I want to do here is say, let's think about how other people have thought, because there are people who rely on these, and there are people who think this way. There are people who think differently. And if we want to start to understand how one might be right, the other might be wrong, how we're going to interact with each other and holding those beliefs, we have to understand differences of opinions. We have to understand the grounds in which those opinions arise from, and then we should hopefully be able to articulate our own beliefs through those. And I think there are other grounds to articulate beliefs. I think your actions are important. They should hopefully reflect your thoughts and your basis, your foundations. So that's really what I want to do today is, let's think about the way other people have thought about justice. Because today we definitely think differently than humanity did before. So, that being said, does anyone, going back to that question, does anyone have, and I think that answer's totally fine, and good, one reason for thinking justice is different and equality is true is through the Christian God. Other people try to explain it in other ways. What are some other ways people have tried to do it?
Through a naturalistic world.
Interesting. And so, in that role, though, how is that portrayed? How is equality seen in naturalism?
I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but it's something that we all deserve,
Okay. So, we can play this game again, though. Why? I don't know. And if you don't know, that's fine.
The why.
The why, and you've got this pesky problem of why, and it's not going to go away. Okay, and I think we've illustrated though well enough that through your idea, your base level ideas, Aristotle did have a relationship with some sort of theology, and saw that largely he was being teleological. So through those base level ideas, he was able to emerge through that emerged some idea of justice. It looks a lot different from what ours does today. But I think we can go on and look at someone else and their idea, and I think it looks a lot closer to Christianity. But it still isn't, and so we're going to want to talk about that. I will read on Cicero. If you don't know Cicero, he was one of the most influential orators and lawyers in Rome He's been hugely influential in the development of American law. One of my readings said a lot of our founding fathers knew Cicero by heart, and so very, very important to the development of American thought. Okay, this is Cicero. Law is the highest reason implanted in nature, which commands what ought to be done and forbids the opposite. This reason, when firmly fixed and fully developed in the human mind, is law. And so they believe that law is intelligence, whose natural function is to command right conduct and forbid wrongdoing. They think that this quality has derived its name in Greek from the idea of granting to every man his own, and in our language, I believe it has been named from the idea of choosing. For as they attributed the idea of fairness to the word law, so we have given it that selection. Though both ideas properly belong to law, now if this is correct, as I think it to be in general, then the origin of justice is to be found in law. For the law is a natural force. It is the mind and reason of the intelligent man, the standard by which justice and injustice are measured. Anyone know what he means by law? You can look at the footnote down there if that helps. I'm really asking a bigger question than I think is explained there.
You know, the law of nature and what every person used to think everyone's born with,
Mhm.
an idea of, what's good and what's wrong.
Yes. And so if it in context helps, Cicero, again, really difficult to understand Roman theology because people held a lot of different views on it. He did hold to a theology, and it was thought that he actually went beyond Roman theology of many gods in that there would be one God above those many gods. So he does have a source of this natural law that he's talking about, and you can see it in a lot of his writings. So the question here that I think is important is if we have this law that is laid out by Cicero, and it's equality, it's natural, everyone should be able to adhere to it, why in Rome did we not see equality? If that's what justice is, why didn't it happen?
Is he saying that everyone there, I thought it was that everyone that was Roman.
Actually, yeah, that is,
All the rest.
that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
That's totally right.
Greek.
I think there's,
Extension of Aristotle's.
yeah, I mean, he would have known Aristotle very well, read Plato as well. So these are going to be really influential on Cicero and Roman society. So we do see, defining the citizen, as Aristotle struggled to do. Who's the citizen? Cicero's going to do the same. There you
I was just gonna say, it's just really utilitarian.
Mm-hmm.
So only as much as someone is helpful to the society is their worth determined.
Yeah. It's what's really interesting on that note actually is I think it was Plato defined the ideal city as being a maximum of 5,040 people. And so you see a really unique type of utilitarianism there, is saying this is the maximum we can provide utility for, everyone would be balanced. He is some weird version of Pythagoras' mathematics. I couldn't defend that to you right now, but it's just a weird way that we would say it's a weird way of looking at it. But again, Plato is this mega figure who's been really influential. I don't think it's enough to say it's weird. Why? Cicero's the same way. Why should their opinion have been valued at that time?
I think we can compare it to today. Like we have laws today, then why isn't there equality in America still, even though we have these laws? So I think that was a problem.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, what is equality?
There is a difference between equality and equity, and in today's world, I think we should focus more on equity than equality.
And what's equity?
So equity is basically, there's a really good visual, I'll say in a visual way. So equality is there's 3 people who are watching a baseball game. There's a fence over it. So in order to be equal and fair, they provide like a box step for each person. There's a tall person who's like an adult, teenager, and then a kid, and they each get the same level box step. In the second picture, which is equity, the adult gets a shorter box step so he can see just above the fence. The teenager gets a higher box step so he can still see over the fence, and the baby gets like the highest box so they can see over the fence. So that is equity, is providing what is fair to the individual, not like to all the masses, because we know, like based on our society, that not everyone has the same opportunities.
And opportunity, you hit it, the other really well accepted definition of equality, of opportunity. And so a lot of people will say that these two ideas don't work together. They might happen, you might get, in a perfect world, you have equal opportunity that results in equal outcome, or in each individual being put at a similar, each one can see over the fence. But how do we assess which equality is right? Because you can't necessarily do them both. Each one over the fence takes away the level initial playing field. These are just some more issues we have to think about. And again, that's what I'm trying to present, is there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of different ideas, concepts that are fighting with each other. And that fight means that it isn't enough to say it's the individual, because it can't be. We've seen that. You can't have the society where everyone gets to be and define themselves, because the other person's going to define it differently, and that person no longer fits in their world. And so over time we can see this relationship. But the main point is getting to the roots, going to the base, the foundation, and how does justice proceed from that foundation. So we can move on to the Declaration of Independence. What's the time? Okay, this one's short, fortunately. Terry, can you read us the Declaration of Independence?
Nice and short.
Mm-hmm.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Excellent reading. So, what are the three major claims about rights in this statement?
They are endowed by a creator.
Mm-hmm. One?
Self-evident.
Yes.
Unalienable rights.
Correct. Very good. So, what brings these together? How can they all be in one sentence?
Justice.
Justice, that's the point. Yeah, I mean, that's the point in writing this. Justice from, and it is one of the claims, endowed by the Creator. And so they have a reason for aligning this idea of justice back to their Creator. And that's the way the Declaration of Independence works. Are we 3:30 or 3?
Oh, 4:30.
4? Oh, sorry, that's not 4:30. Okay. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure, because I know we're nearing 4. Okay. And does this actually tell us what justice is? Does it tell us the essence of justice?
My opinion is better than the other 3.
Okay, yeah.
Close, but maybe no cigar, I don't know.
It's close, it's close.
Well, it would also feel closest to us.
It would, I think that's true.
It's our world.
This is the most relevant context. No, that's not a claim that it is the correct context, but it is the one we're most familiar with. I kind of would say it doesn't actually tell us what justice is, though. The essence isn't there. Now, you can talk about the endowed by the Creator as being why they wrote this, but they don't actually explain what justice is. Yet, what do we do with this claim? What in America, do we apply this to every day, all the time?
Our laws.
Our laws, yes. And our laws have become, they've become absolute in a way, unto themselves. So everyone's appealing to equality. As we've said, there are multiple types of equality. How are we appealing to that? Everyone's saying this is justice. It's in the Declaration of Independence. This is not the Constitution. But this is what we are. But it doesn't actually say what it is. And I think that's a missing piece that we're talking about. What is it? So, does anyone have any speculation? This is pure speculation on how we got from Rome to the U.S., which is supposed to be a non-Christian nation. That might be.
Well, I mean, the people who formed our nation were familiar with the message of Christ, which would not be the case for any of the others.
That's true. Interestingly, I found most of the founding fathers who wrote this were largely deists. So, I mean, I think famously Benjamin Franklin ended his Bible at the New Testament.
That doesn't mean that.
No, yeah, and they are
basic
familiar.
thought.
They are familiar, and I think,
Rooted.
yeah. Do you have any
No,
more?
I'm
Sorry.
just saying.
Okay, they are familiar with that idea. So maybe a more simple question is: are all people biologically are all people created equal?
It depends what you mean by equal.
Biologically?
Biologically, yeah. So by equal, are they all capable of the same things?
No.
No, but
No.
it doesn't make another person less or more inferior and superior.
And what are you appealing to make that claim?
There's common humanity involved. It doesn't have to do with ability or disability.
Okay, where's the humanity from?
You know, pinpoint it.
Well, I think he's basing it off of, taking that idea of equality as a negative, like if, we're not equal, then it's negative.
Mhm.
But it's more like we're just not the same.
We're just not the same.
created differently for different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Which then, in other ways, we're not created equals. We're created differently.
Functionally different.
Yes. Yes. So you see why, this is the question, do you see why in this statement they needed to appeal to a greater force? A universal. It doesn't have to be God, a universal. Someone reject that need?
Huh?
Would you challenge that?
I don't know if I have the strength, but I don't think I have a need for that. I mean, if I arrive at a conclusion that there is common humanity involved, for me that's enough. I don't need to stretch it.
Wait, repeat what it is that needed to be defined by the universal.
Equality.
Equality. I mean, but if you may not have a need, but as soon as your definition varied from someone else's, that person might have a need for that to be
But again,
engaged in universal.
the whole equality is a modern concept. It's not an ancient concept. So humans could have cared less way back, even though there were more religious people back then. They cared less about equality and justice, to be honest with you.
Right, and so that is what we're talking about, the development of that. What's the grounds of the development? I mean, if you had been a member of the ancient world, your idea of common humanity wouldn't have been accepted.
I think it would have been accepted, but this situation would have been so different. I don't know, people, maybe didn't have time for it. I don't know, but.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so in the interest of time, actually, would you like to read the next one? Because it kind of goes along most with what you're saying. Concept of law.
Who, me?
Yes, you. Sorry.
Concept of Okay. We only need the word validity and commonly only use it to answer questions which arise within a system of rules where the status of a ruler as a member of the system depends on its satisfying certain provided by the rule of recognition. No such question can arise to the validity of the very rule of recognition which provides the criteria. It can neither be valid nor invalid, but it's simply accepted as appropriate for us in this way to express the simple fact by saying darkly that its validity is assumed but cannot be demonstrated. It's like saying that we assume but we can demonstrate that the standard it's supposed to be meter or metro?
It's meter.
Meter.
It's the British spelling.
Yeah.
Okay. Bar in Paris, which is the ultimate test of correctness of all measurements in meters, is itself correct.
I find H.L.A. Hart a very challenging writer. Does anyone know what he's trying to say here? Does anyone who he is first? H.L.A. Hart, very influential legal philosopher of the 20th century, professor at Oxford, really espoused the idea of legal positivism.
Basically, he's saying that if you believe that you cannot know for certain whether or not something is right or wrong, it is like saying that you cannot know for certain whether or not something is an actual meter in length.
Yeah,
Using-
or the
using
correct
the-
meter, yeah.
You cannot be certain in the absolute.
Right,
Yeah.
or going back to what I said earlier about within the system and the system. So there are two different types of validity there. Well, sorry, what were you going to say?
You know, I remember before I had the counsel of God when I was a kid, like a child.
Uh-huh.
You know, 5 or 6. I remember thinking to myself, you know, punching baby in the face is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea of God or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember thinking that, you know, hitting a baby is wrong.
Yeah. So I agree with you, and I would go beyond, you know, hitting babies is wrong, and saying I think that is in most people, that
As a
feeling.
4-year-old, I was saying, thinking that.
Right, as a 4-year-old. And so, but if we're talking about that, there are a couple things on that. One is, are there other explanations on why all 4-year-olds might have that feeling? Or what about the outlier, the 4-year-old who doesn't have that feeling? How are they accounted for in a system of common humanity?
Well,
I think the outlier would be able to tell you that. I mean, that's a term that I could be described by. That I live, that my thought is outside of what generally is expected for me to think. The things about what the philosophers have to say, I understand from their point of view, but if it's Christian, and I'm supposed to be Christian, this can't in any way be justified. You can't ever justify it at all, because there's only this one law. And this man Jesus demonstrated that in a scientific way. He had God, the principle, and he was the idea. It's one. He said one, meaning that it was one mind, one thought. He had individuality and he had identity. But those were individuality and identities of the one. And he proved it. And I think that's science. That's true science. Philosophy
So-
for me is that this is not the science. This is a false science. This is science trying to explain that we have different minds. Each of us have a different mind. We all have a different. Everything is different. We're how many minds that will never come
So
together?
there are interesting points in there. In the interest of staying on topic, I would like to.
I mean, I get it, but it's just so hard. I guess I try to block it a little bit because I don't want to get. I know where I think, and it's hard for me, being an outsider,
No, I welcome the outside opinion. That's fine.
Yeah.
And I do think we engage, the mind of God is one. I would say, though, that as Christians, we exist apart from God. We're not a pantheist religion. We're not all one being. But really, what I want to talk about here is heart. So his idea on validating law. We were trying to discuss what it means. It's quite complicated. I think we were starting to get there. It's really out of this idea of called legal positivism, which was very popular at the beginning of the 20th century. It's largely rejected in pieces today. It was developed, I should say, mostly espoused by someone named A.J. Ayer, who worked with H.L.A. Hart. The basis of it was saying, going beyond empiricism, we only know to be true what we observe, saying that which we can observe is not false, it's meaningless. So we can't talk about it at all. So in light of that, does someone understand how, do we understand how H.L.A. Hart comment relates to meaninglessness? So, I think Christi said it, that asking about the length of the meter, you can't even do that. It doesn't make sense to do that, is what he's saying. But we've gone through a bunch of other systems, and all of them are trying to say, how do we know that this that we believe is right? He's saying, in the rule of recognition, that because we commonly recognize it, it's right, you can't question it. It's a really different way of thinking, very, very different way of thinking to previous, almost every previous idea. I mean, maybe pre-Socratics in their relativism would have thought that. But it's largely unique, and what I would go further, it's really been influenced our current society, and we think that way. We might not say you can't ask that question, but we just don't ask that question, which I think is a sad state of affairs. So if we want to talk about the meter, maybe you can't say that the meter is the correct length, but you could say for what? Why does that mean? Like, what are you building? Should it be that long? And there are different questions you can ask about that, different questions you can ask about validity, and they are meaningful. So I found that this view really interesting for the way it kind of straddles modernism and postmodernism, and would probably be challenged on that by a lot of philosophers, but we have empiricism, we have the way things are laid out, we know how we can do it as modernism, meaninglessness as postmodernism, and those are the two worlds that positivism lives in, and we seem to have gone largely down meaninglessness or validity within a system. So we can go on and on and on about these. Maybe ending this section on, do you think Hart succeeded in his attempts at saying we don't need? Do you think that is a valid statement?
And the statement is it's basically saying that
We don't need to validate the system.
okay,
Well, we
we
can't.
have to have a system in order to know like the length of the
Yeah,
meter.
I think that's true. I think that's right.
I guess it's a sort of practicality sort of thing to him, probably. Like, we could, talk about until the sun goes down.
Right.
And the meter works as we have it right now, pretty
So
well.
a
and
pragmatic approach.
I guess so. And then interesting, of course, the system of measurement used to be based upon like how long the salesman arm was or something, and you knew you were going to get shorted by literally the short guy if he was selling you stuff, because he would be like, well, it's this much, for $10, just like old Longshanks over there. I mean, why are you telling me I'm going to cheat you? But so,
Yeah, and so it raises up a lot of questions, but it's been really influential, and that's kind of my point in bringing this up, is the transition out of a more classical framework, out of there is universal, into our modern world. And so you see a lot of different views espoused like this in relative morality and constructivism and consequentialism and utilitarianism in different modern philosophers. And really, you see a lot of it out on the streets. And so if I want to understand the minds of the people out on the streets who are telling me what they think is just and right and must be done, well, they're not validating their system. They don't even think about needing to. So in a way, I would say Hart has succeeded. He has succeeded in getting the world there, not really succeeded in defending his own principle there, the way I see it. So you give the result, but it's not really backed up philosophically. Okay, so we are here to talk about the Christian view of justice, and that is the last excerpt. It's about Amos and biblical justice. And Peter, can you read that? There are a couple Hebrew statements you can we'll follow
Skip
along.
them?
Yeah. So try, yeah. Go
Try
for
it.
it.
Some
Yeah,
of them don't
try.
even have vowels.
Well, Hebrew.
I feel like that's strong.
The terms justice and righteousness are found hundreds of times in the Old Testament. Over time, the church's repetitious use of the words has caused it to take on the milieu of religiosity. In general, Hebrew nouns are much more concrete than their English counterparts. Where English nouns are concepts to be reflected upon, Hebrew nouns are actual actions one takes. The Hebrew word for righteousness contains the whatever root found in the word, how do I say that?
Stack.
That's a sh-
Meaning straight, fixed, fully what it should be. Tzedek suggests a standard by which things are measured. The word justice is made of that root, which has to do with judicial activity at every level. This root forms the word mishpat, which contrasts with the static nature of tzedek, and implies the set of actions that must be taken to conform to tzedek. Together, these words form the idea that there are specific actions that must be taken to be in a right relationship with God. One is useless without the other. Israel had lost both. Amos came to bring the measure of righteousness and restore the system of justice through which it could be achieved. The process of moral decay through the pursuit of material pleasure led Israel to corruption of its social fabric. Bribery was common, business practices were deliberately deceptive. Justice, the social foundation of Israel, which God loves, became corrupt. Worse, as the value of humanity dwindled, its corruption came at the expense of the weak. Deuteronomy 10:18 speaks of God, who executes justice to the orphan and the widow, as being biased in favor of the unprivileged. Amos came to declare God's judgment, which was not only more severe because the Nuvarrish Israelites were oppressing a helpless group, but because they had known law and rejected its reality. In so doing, Israel had become, in effect, a nation foreign to Yahweh. Amos came to address the results of a prolonged period of man serving as his own measure. When man validated his own existence, a hedonistic culture was born. It was the pursuit of pleasure that created a class. A poor class had to be created before it could be exploited. If the individual is the measure, it naturally follows that members of the upper class would consider themselves of more value. Viewing the deterioration of a society as it loses the basis of morality and equality should cause those wishing to engage in social and economic justice to realize they must consider the basis for their beliefs. They must ask questions. What is justice? How will it be measured? What is equality? How will it be achieved? Where does my authority come from? How will it be checked?
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with the question of, are there any similarities described here to our contemporary world?
I would say that hedonistic. So when our rights become, my right is to make myself a world in which I am happy and not think about how that affects others. And so it's good to have that challenged, you know. Like, what are the things that make me comfortable? Are those actually stamping on someone else's rights, or are they using someone else to get, you know, yeah.
Right, I think that's true. Any others?
I think it's interesting where it says, when man validated his own existence, a hedonistic culture was born. It was the perceived pleasure that created a class system for a class that could be created before it could be exploited. I feel like that's actually very much what we see with like the banking system, where the middle and lower classes are pretty much riddled in debt and are unable to climb out of it in a lot of cases, whereas the people running these companies are taking advantage of the situation and actively so.
Right. I think, yes, those are pretty much the two major ones that I think are similar. So there are a lot of things you could ask in that. I've got a big list, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to pick the most important ones. If we saw a fairly similar concept of justice out of Cicero in Rome, as we do here, I'll say there are definite differences in Amos, but a lot of similarities in equality and natural law. Why do we see a much different result in Israel than we did in Rome? Result after this message coming.
Humans are unpredictable.
Huh?
Humans are unpredictable.
It's a possibility. I have what I believe to be the answer. This is a short statement by Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor of Rome in the late 2nd century, or mid-2nd century. He said, "Either all things proceed from an intelligent source and come together as in one body, and part ought not to find fault with what is done for the benefit of the whole, or they are atoms and nothing else than mixture and dispersion. Why then art thou disturbed? Say to the ruling faculty, art thou dead? Art thou corrupted? Art thou playing a hypocrite? Art thou become a beast? Dost thou herd and feed with the rest?" So really the statement there, either there is a God, there is a source, or we're all atoms. It doesn't really matter. Does that sound like something a Christian would say? Either there is a God, there isn't a God. It doesn't really matter. No. Yeah, it does. It does.
Because that's the whole.
It matters a lot, right? And so the Christian is gonna, or the Jew in this case, is gonna be fundamental on that point. So what I would say the difference arises is out of our. So we've discussed, they define citizens differently, they define equality differently, they define happiness differently, but really, the big difference is out of the view on the source of their deities, of God. And for the Stoic Marcus Aurelius, it didn't really change anything. He was going to be the way he was regardless. So he could go on in being a humanitarian, as many people describe him, simultaneously persecuting the Christians. But God is coming into Israel and saying, no, you can't do that. It doesn't work that way. And it's because God loves his people. God created them in the image of himself.
And
Hence,
Judaism doesn't include this God that loves.
well, I don't think that's.
It's a God that punishes, that is this.
Well, Amos is in the Hebrew Bible, which is read by the Jews.
Amos wasn't really, Amos was Christian, Christian than Judaism. The apostles and all that, they were not Jews. And they say
Well, that
that
is-
Jesus
that's-
could not walk in Judaism. He could not, because that was not the truth that they, that they were teaching. It wasn't God.
I agree that it wasn't the truth, yes. And so there's that, and that's what God is saying through Amos, saying, you guys in Israel, you Jewish people are not living in the truth. And so I would still say Amos was a member of the Jewish people. He came from Israel into Judah, or into Judah into Israel, I forgot, to bring a message and saying this is the reconciliation, this is justice and righteousness that need to go together, that need to give us a measure on how to achieve justice, being right in the Word of God. And so if I want to quickly close, is saying, does Christianity understand social justice? Well, you can see pretty clearly that other similar ideas of justice didn't produce any amount of what we call social justice today. They didn't necessarily care for the poor. They didn't go and work in the streets, and they didn't advocate on that behalf. They went for what they deserved. They created their own power, and they just let the world work out. But God, the Christian God, the Jewish God, says, no, that's not enough. We need justice and righteousness, which, as the Christians would then go on to claim, is something that no individual can achieve on their own, which is the need for Jesus, who becomes their righteousness. So I was really intrigued by the relationship of justice and righteousness always going together. Humans, in the Christian view, are not righteous. Therefore, as we see in the New Testament, and if we have more time, I want to bring that in, say Jesus becoming the righteousness of God. So in a very quick wrapping that up, is Christians understand social justice because their common idea of social justice is born out of Christianity and is not reflected through other ideas of what justice is and how justice is achieved. I think we're nearly done. And I know that's been a long discussion, and it's basically been questions. But if there's an opportunity to say, if anyone wants to say more, feel free. I have more to say, but in the interest of wrapping it up, I'm fine finishing.
I haven't even spoken yet, I'm kidding. I think some Christians have the idea of what social justice is. Not all Christians. I've been around way too many Christians in my life.
Right. Now, you're going where this isn't played out within all Christianity?
Yeah, so I know a guy who goes to Africa and helps the poor and stuff.
Mhm.
He's doing it simply because he says that is the Christian message. He has no other sinister thing behind his actions. He's not trying to convert them, not trying to do anything. He's just trying to serve.
One of my favorite quotes is, Christianity, it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting, it's Christianity has been found hard and left untried. And I think this is largely true. We have a lot of people who call themselves Christians who don't know what it is. They don't have a basis for that understanding, and they don't really try, because it's hard. It is hard. Man I was speaking to about before I did this was saying a lot of Christianity is doing the hard work of friendship and actually going to get to know people and actually caring about them and where they are and asking real questions and not living safely in abstractness, as you put it, which I think is a really beautiful way to say that. And I find it to be a very unique view, unique procession from a view that other people hold. And it doesn't proceed the same way out of many, many other views. But really my point here today is just to say, let's stop and think about why we do things and think about what things mean and their essences and what holds us together before we just run out and say, this is it, and hound people. That's really not doing social justice, that's being angry. So that is basically my closing. Happy to stay longer if anyone has more questions. But thank you for participating. That's what made it work. And I was very nervous about that.
Yay!